I actually haven't delved into this with anybody prior to this, and I've done about 8 billion interviews for this record, so here's the exclusive. When I was in my late teens, I wrote a piece of music that was about 19 minutes long. That was, in large part, inspired by NoFX's The Decline. But it didn't have any vocals, but it was just this really, really long, wandering sort of piece of like hardcore and emo and electronica and weirdness. And it was sort of, it had its moments, let's say that. But the final riff of it was the main riff of, the only riff, I should say, of Farewell to My City. And it, for a long time, I thought it didn't make sense because it's basically a synthesis of all the different parts that made up the 19-minute long song. And I was of the opinion that it wouldn't be any good if it didn't have that sort of context to demonstrate what it was. And then I sort of had this realization that actually it's really good on its own, and the preceding 16 minutes of the song were a waste of time anyway. So the point being, I had this riff, and I had this idea about, I like one riff songs. Do you know what I mean? Songs that just kind of build as a piece. And the music sort of came together, and, you know, and it's basically, it's one bass riff that goes through the whole song, and then it adds a guitar, and then it adds an organ, and it adds another guitar, and it adds a piano, and it adds synthesizers and percussion, and it just, you know, grows exponentially. And it hits a point, and I had the vocal melody and all the melodic parts of the song were kind of came quite early. And there's a Samuel Johnson reference in there. Samuel Johnson famously said, "When a man is tired of London, he's tired of life." And I was like, "Fuck you, dude." You know, and I was particularly taken, if I can be taken with my own lyrics, but I mean, the idea was kind of to write a breakup song to a city. I love the line, "I'll still see you at shows," because it's just the kind of lame bullshit everybody says when you're breaking up with somebody. We can still be friends. And I have to say that these days when I go back to London, which is pretty often because I'm 90 minutes from the city,
Yeah.
it is quite a lot like having dinner with an ex or a drink with an ex. You start by remembering why you were into them, and you finish by remembering with why you left. You know what I mean? So, you know, I sort of had the ending of the song, and I sort of, the music was there, and I was, and so there is a theme running through this record stylistically of me experimenting with a slightly different vocal style, which is the kind of, Rich Kossyriff called it the angry preacher style. I mean, it's obviously, I mean, in large part, it's the references I would give for it would be like Craig Finn and Marky Smith, essentially. But it's sort of borderline spoken word. It's kind of aggressive poetry, however you want to put it, and it features on Non Serviam and Fatherless and The Resurrectionists and indeed this song. So and it was quite funny. We would be doing vocal takes, and Rich would be like, "More angry preacher, bash that Bible," or whatever. But yeah, so anyway, so I had the music, and I had this quite often happens to me in songwriting. I have a feeling more than an idea. I know what the end result will feel like, and the difficult part is how do I get from here to there. And you know, I knew what the whole first 3/4 of the vocals needed to feel like, and what almost I could hear the delivery in my head before I had any words at all. And I remember thinking to myself, this is going to take a fucking while. And then it didn't in the end, because we decided to leave. I think we were sort of halfway through the extremely boring and traumatic experience of selling and moving house and all that shit. And but we were still in London, and I had something to do in town, and it was a beautiful late summer's day. And the journey from the centre of town back to Hornsey, where we used to live, is about 40 minutes on public transport, and it's about 3.5 hours on foot. Okay. And I had nothing else on that day, and it was a beautiful day, and I thought, fuck it, I'm going to walk home. And then this wasn't quite planned, but I sort of suddenly realised that the thing I'd been doing was right next to these student halls where I first lived in London, which was roughly 1,000 years ago. And I started walking and realised that it was possible to pick a route. I mean, I was so in love with London and London history and London geography and all the rest of it, and I know certain areas of the city very, very well. And I realised that there was a route that I could plan that wasn't quite straight ahead, but wasn't far off, that would be largely autobiographical and almost chronological. There are some bits where I moved out and then back in, but regardless. So I could go, from one set of student halls to a house where I lived, and then to a next place where I lived, and then, the bars I used to hang out in Camden and blah, blah. And so I did this walk, and as I was walking, realized that I could just write about this walk, and that would be the song. And was writing and just sort of scribbling in a notebook as I went, probably looking like a lunatic. But then, fortunately, you fit in if you look like a lunatic wandering around London. So I didn't cause too much of a kerfuffle. Right. But and there genuinely were. There was my old flat that I used to live in with my friend Dave, which, as the song says, like started out as a glorious place to live and then became the center of my grinding drug addiction. And there's a line, all the morning returns from tour and the street corners where I used to score, which quite often would be on the same occasion. Do you know what I mean? You get back from an airport, make a phone call, let's fucking go. And then, so North London is characterised by its 7 hills, and the area of Crouch End and Hornsey is distinguished by the fact it's over a hill called the Hog's Back. So it's actually outside the London Basin, and you crest the hill, and the next valley kind of opens out before you, and Alexandra Palace is on the following hill. And there was, that is a place in London where I found my peace. That's the last place I lived, and where I lived with my wife, and, where we lived when we got married and all this sort of shit. So it just sort of, it came together. And then I went home and I had a demo of the song ready to go. I kind of walked in and my wife was like, "Took your fucking time getting home." And I was like, ta, less talking, more recording. And sort of ran upstairs and knocked out a demo of it. And it took a few goes to get the rhythm to fit, because whilst it's not quite on the beat, as it were, the idea is that it drifts in and out of coordination with the tempo. And it may sound like it's completely loose, but it's actually, like most things in my life, pretty meticulously planned. And it just came together. And again, with that one, by the time we got to the studio, I'd obviously spent a lot of time figuring out how it went, and we did a take, and Rich was like, "Huh, cool." He's like, "Do you want to do that again?" And I was like, "Yeah, there was one bit where I fluffed some of the rhythm," and he was like, "Really?" So I think we did 2 or 3 takes, and then that was the record. And it was very clearly going to be the last song of the record. And the final thing to add is that the sound right at the beginning of the record, the song, is the tube. It's the sound of the London Underground, and it's the Victoria line, for those who are wondering.